I didn't build this land for war, but I built it to survive one. You ever say something out loud and realize halfway through that you're not talking to anyone but yourself? That was me the morning that came. 12 acres of hard-earned dirt, 2 rusted water tanks, 1 stubborn windmill, and the kind of silence that doesn't need to be loud to feel dangerous, the kind of quiet that remembers, that holds on to your footprints like second skin. Bear was trotting just ahead of me, dogs part shepherd, part mystery, all heart. We weren't hunting or hiking, just walking the way men our age do when we've seen too much and talked too little. His ears twitched once. That was my first warning. He froze like someone hit switch, ears locked forward, body low to the ground, no bark, no growl, just stillness that says one thing. Something's not right. I took another step, slower this time, hand drifting toward the inside of my vest, not for the weapon, just for the comfort of muscle memory. You get to a certain age, you stop reaching for the gun and start reaching for the memory of what it felt like to be too late. That's when I saw him, just still hanging in the air behind black SUV. 2 motorcycles flanked it like security detail for a politician no one voted for. Chrome-polished, boots wide, and 3 men who stood like they weren't afraid of much. And why would they be? They weren't expecting fight. They were expecting compliance. The fourth was worse, Karen. Beige sweater, clipboard under one arm like it was a damn badge. You know, the tight, polite, perfect posture, a smile sharp enough to slice through drywall. Frank, she said, like I'd just shown up late for some neighborhood brunch. Glad you're back. I wanted to resolve this in person. She moved like hostess, stepping aside to show me what was behind her at my gate. Steel-reinforced, hand-welded, navy blue. Painted that way by my wife before she passed. Last thing she touched before the chemo took her strength and time finished the job. And now this woman, this walk and corporate haircut, stood on my land telling me it was no longer compliant. You didn't get authorization to cross the line, I said, not loud, just even. Calm like coiled wire. She smiled again, soft but wrong. Actually, under HOA Perimeter Code Section 2.1, your front fence still falls within jurisdiction of community patrol. I looked at her, really look. Clipboard, boots still clean. Pen capped shoot at the end. Nervous habit. She didn't believe her own authority. That's the thing about enforcers. They borrow confidence they don't oppose to earn it. The biker closest to her, though. He snorted, leaned back against my fence post like he paid the mortgage on it. Pretty bold, he said, for guy running illegal steel. Bear let out growl low enough to rattle teeth. Not bark, just that sound you hear right before mine clicks. I took one more step forward. That's when I saw it glint through the SUV window. Lens, maybe, badge, could be, didn't matter. I pulled the small remote from my vest, flipped the guard switch. Nothing flashy. Just basic kill switch I'd rigged years ago for backup power. The red light blinked under the base of the gate. Karen's eyes narrowed. Step back, I said. She hesitated. The biker didn't. He took step forward. Boom. Not Hollywood boom. No fireball. No slow-mo debris. Just raw force. Gate designed to withstand pressure tests. Snap off its hinges like it had had enough. One panel flew backward into dry dirt, crashing down with the finality. Slammed courtroom door. The lead biker went airborne. Hit the ground flat. Rolled once. Groaned like a man who'd just remembered how much rib cage can hurt. Karen dropped her clipboard. Bear didn't flinch. I walked through the smoke, not fast, just deliberate. You said it wasn't compliant, I said. Now it's gone. Karen's mouth opened, but words didn't quite form. This is destruction of community property, she managed. I looked her dead in the eye. No, I said, this is me fixing permit problem. The biker was still on the ground, contractor type. Not gang. I leaned over. Do you know where to send the invoice? I told him. He nodded once, slowly. Karen's expression was fury and blazer. We'll be hearing from legal, she hissed. Then I hope they knock first, I said. Bear barked. The other 2 bikers flinched. Karen didn't move, but someone in that SUV was still watching. I felt it. My eyes tracked the open door, but the lens was gone. Just whisper of presence, the kind you feel in your bones. I turned back toward the cabin. Didn't say another word. Didn't look back. Bear pressed against my leg like shadow with heartbeat. We didn't speak. Not in words. But we understood the same thing. That wasn't their attack. That was their introduction. At night, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear. You lived through 3 tours and 2 betrayals. Fear stopped showing up on time. What I felt that night was older, quieter, like memory that walked without shoes. I sat at the kitchen table with an old metal mug, coffee gone cold, and Bear pacing by the front door. He never paces. Not unless he smells something that doesn't belong. He barked once, sharp, precise. I grabbed my flashlight, vest, sidearm, and we walked the land. 12 acres. Doesn't sound like much until you're counting shadow angles and wind directions. Bear led me to the north fence. Same spot he paused earlier. I knelt, brushed back loose dirt. On black box, camera, inlands, micro battery. Civilian tech. but not amateur. I opened it inside, tiny circuit board with handwritten label. Just one word. 3. That meant there were others. Someone had been watching, mapping. They weren't just building case, they were scouting pressure points. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about code violations. This wasn't about rules. This was about leverage. My land wasn't the target. My ability to defend it was. And if you're over 60, if you've ever been told to keep it down or let it go or just sign here, then you know exactly what I mean. We're not fighting over fences. We're fighting over erasure, over the idea that men like us are supposed to age quietly, make room, hand over the keys to younger hands with cleaner shoes. But this place, this land, every bolt, every beam, every inch of steel, it remembers me. It was built by my scars. It was shaped by my ghosts. And if they want to erase me, they're going to have to dig through every square foot of hell I've buried in this dirt. So I gathered the cameras, laid them out on the table like body parts from failed operation. Bear sat in the doorway like sentry, watching, breathing. I fired up an old laptop, air gap since Kandahar, no ports, no wireless, plugged in the reader. 3 signals, one at the barn, one near the generator, one under the main water line. And that's when my hands went still, is that line. The one under the East Ridge, that feeds the aquifer, the real prize. You don't run this much surveillance over gate permit. You run it over resource. You run it when what's buried under the soil is worth more than the man standing on top of it. That night, I circled the property with Bear at my side, planted 3 new motion sensors, rigged few old paint mines with can and fiberglass. I wasn't building traps. I was building questions that anyone who crossed my line would have to answer with stained boots and stung eyes. Because here's the truth they never say out loud. No one tries to remove quiet man unless they're afraid of what he remembers. And I remember everything. Every deal that turned sour. Every handshake that ended in silence. Every favor that came with hook. This isn't about paranoia. This is about pattern. This is about the slow creep of control disguised as a community. And if that sounds familiar, if your town's been changed without your vote, if the rules started reading like contracts you never signed, if the quiet suddenly feels like warning, then maybe you understand. This isn't just my story, it's yours too. 3 days after the gate incident, the air changed, not in temperature, not in scent. No, this shift was deeper, like the land itself had drawn long breath and held it. Air felt it first. He started sleeping closer to the door, not his usual post by the wood stove. No growls, no whining, just quiet tension in his bones that mirrored something in mine. The kind of tension, if you've ever stood watch desert night waiting for convoy that never arrived. There's heaviness that comes when you realize you're not being ignored. You're being studied. It was Thursday when I found the second box, not under the fence, not buried like the first. This one was inside the birdhouse my wife had built before she passed, hung low near the shed. Painted by her hand, screws tightened by mine. It had always faced south toward the creek. Spot birds never used, but she loved anyway. It was keepsake, not trap, until now. It was small, infrared ready, rigged with motion buffer and thermal microplate. Not tech you pick up at a flea market. This was contractor grade, stitched and clean, low power signature, hidden behind a false panel, and tied to it green zip ties, Derek's color code. He always used them on wiring. Said it helped him stay organized. Funny how easy it is to miss betrayal when it's dressed up as help. I didn't oppose. To smash it, not yet. I pried it free, careful, like I was handling something alive. Pocketed it, stepped back from the shed, let Bear sniff the ground. He paused, sniffed again, then veered hard left toward the corner where we store the old propane tanks. He froze again, his eyes locked onto the metal lid. I lifted it slowly, expecting rust. Instead, another camera. Same signature, same damn zip ties. They were in the birdhouse in the tank. I had to assume the rest of the property was no longer mine in the way I thought it was. It was being observed, documented, not by drones, not by satellites, but by the worst kind of enemy, the friendly one. Eric had come by just last week with a muffin tin and a story about squirrels chewing through wiring. I remember how he kept glancing toward the barn, how he asked casually if I'd ever thought about expanding the water line to the South Acre. That wasn't curiosity, that was mapping, that was recon under handshake, and I'd let him in. The anger didn't come fast, it came slow, measured the way winter frost creeps into your bones before you even notice the chill. I didn't storm into his house, I didn't even call. I did what men like us do. I planned. At night, I laid out the old topography maps, overlaid them with my hand-drawn sketches from the last decade, the choke points, the blind spots, the natural echo chambers in the land where voices carried without warning. And one by one, I started planning stories, not lies. Just questions, dummy traps lit with blinking LEDs, fake trail cams hung high and out of reach, trail of breadcrumbs designed not to stop anyone, but to make it without everything, because when man starts questioning what he sees, he moves slower, and slower men are easier to see coming. Reese came by the next morning. No warning, no call. Just the low rumble of his truck and the familiar smell of gasoline and barbed wire optimism he walked in with. A pack of jerky and a crowbar, no words, just a look. He knew something had shifted. We drank coffee in silence for a while. Bear curled under the table, ears twitching every time a bird moved wrong. Eventually, Reese stood, stretched his back, and asked, "Do you want to talk about it or just burn something?" I nodded toward the table where the cameras were laid out. His whistle was long and low. "Well, damn," he muttered, "they've been nesting." I handed him one. He turned it over, eyebrows raised. "Military spec," he said. "Not cheap, not Karen's budget." "Derek," I said. He didn't argue, just nodded and lit cigarette. The next step wasn't violence, it was confirmation. I needed to know how far the infection had spread. That meant watching the watchers. So we built a box. A decoy feed powered by a loop relay running heat signatures from an old camping trip, my face. Bears bark, the firelight flicker of normal evening. All fake, we buried it in plain sight behind the tool shed and waited. 3 nights later, the trap snapped. The feed went dark for exactly 90 seconds, then came back. Someone had tapped it, tested it, confirmed it, but they didn't disable it. That's how we knew it wasn't Karen, it was bigger. Someone trained. Someone with orders not to spook the target. Me. Reese stayed over the next few nights. Not because I needed help, because he needed to be there. He'd served too. He'd seen what I'd seen, different countries, same way. We didn't talk tactics. We talked timing. "You know what this is, right?" he asked on the third night, leaning against the railing with flask in hand. "It's not about your gate. It's about your water, that aquifer under your ridge, deep and clean, untapped. They don't want you gone because of violation. They want you out so they can lease it." I didn't respond. I just handed him the permit file from 1997 where the clause was written in dry legal ink: grandfather rights contingent upon continuous private use. A single lapse and it could be revoked, reallocated, weaponized. That night I slept light, every creak of wood a whisper of intent. Bear shifted in his sleep, uneasy. At 2:17 a.m. the power cut, not flickered, cut, dead, total. That was no outage. That was orchestration. The wind-up clock in the hallway froze. My boots hit the floor before the second hand stopped ticking. I didn't reach for the lights. I moved in muscle memory. Vest on, Glock holstered, the old remote for the paint traps in my left hand. Bear at my heel. No barking. Just motion. We didn't go to the front door. We went low, out the root cellar, through the trench. The night was still. No engines, no voices. Just crackling tension in the air like the static before radio transmission. The first sign was fire, fast, controlled, not random. The east edge of the chicken coop went up like it had been doused ahead of time. Someone wanted to distract me or draw me out. I triggered the first mine. A pressure snap-coated one, intruder in blue and fiberglass. The scream was human, young, desperate, not a soldier upon. The second fell in the trench, not cold on. A rebar spike I'd set months ago for drainage. The third tried the back door. Didn't know about the salt trigger under the welcome mat. Took full blast to the knees. He went down hard. Reese arrived 5 minutes later, crowbar in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. "Live?" he asked. "So far," I said. "We found the fourth, one near the generator, conscious," shaking. "Hands up, no ID, no patch, just a bad idea in a black hoodie." "Why here?" I asked. He said nothing, just stared. "Tell your friends," I whispered. "Next time we're not using paint." He limped away before I could change my mind, and we stood there, Reese and I, Bear between us, watching the smoke rise. My land didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like contested ground. And that's when I knew this wasn't escalation. This was acquisition. But they forgot one thing. You can't buy off man who's already buried his past in the dirt he walks on. You can't scare man who's already lost everything but his will. You can't erase name carved into steel. So they'd sent shadows, test runs, distractions. But I wasn't defending anymore. I was preparing. And the difference between defense and preparation is simple. One waits, the other chooses. And I was ready to choose, ready to write the ending they'd been trying to draft in my absence. Because I didn't grow old to go quiet. I didn't survive war to surrender to paperwork. I didn't raise Bear to watch him sleep under camera. The next man who steps onto my land will not be met with warnings. He'll be met with memory. And I have long one. It started with tomato plant, left on my porch in clay pot. No note, just sticky label that read, "Sorry for judging, Karen." week earlier, that would have felt like joke, maybe even trap. But that morning, after what we'd been through, it was different kind of message. Forgiveness, not alliance, just a quiet way of saying, we see you now. The neighborhood was shifting. People who used to look away when I passed were nodding. Some even waved. It wasn't friendliness, it was recognition, respect born not out of fear, but survival. They'd seen something they couldn't unsee. They'd seen me hold ground. Bear started sleeping easier after the raid. Not fully relaxed, but enough to stretch out again by the stove instead of curling near the door. Still, every so often, he'd jolt awake and look toward the shed, ears up, nostrils twitching like he was tracking something I couldn't smell. I listened when he did that, because Bear didn't worry without cause. And that morning, when he refused to walk past the old fencing near the goat pen, I knew we weren't done, not even close. I took out the wave scanner, dug it out of the EOD kit I hadn't touched in years. Still ran cold, still remembered how to the way only gear built for war knows how to. I swept the shed, the fencing, the foundation lines. Nothing at first. But then near the base of the propane regulator, ping, solid signal. I dug 2 inches under the gravel, and there it was. Capsule mic, then black with short stubby antenna, same specs as the others. But this one had something new. Red etched dot on the base, not manufacturer's mark, tag someone was tracking deployment versions, cataloging placements. This wasn't scavenged gear or EII surveillance. This was contracted, log rotated. When I cracked the casing, it didn't just record. It stored timestamps, audio snippets, fragments of my own voice, me telling Bear to stay, me whistling, me cursing about the broken pump last Tuesday. They weren't just watching, they were learning. Voice pattern analysis, behavioral indexing, predictive modeling. That's when I stopped being angry and started getting surgical. The maps came out again, not just my overlays. I requested archive zoning drafts from the county clerk, old survey photos, aquifer assessments from water rights case back in 2004. Turns out my land sat on clean slice of subterranean gold, fresh water, untouched, high yield, a resource that hadn't been tapped because back in the 90s it was deemed residentially restricted, unless the land went dormant. And the HOA had recently tried to file non-utilization claim. I cross-referenced dates. Their paperwork had been submitted 3 days before Karen ever knocked on my gate with that fake smile. This wasn't spontaneous. This was playbook. That afternoon, Derek showed up again. No muffins this time. No clipboard. Just look in his eyes like he'd come to confess or make sure I wouldn't. He parked further back from the house than usual, left the engine running. I didn't invite him in, just stood on the porch with Bear next to me, silent. He took 3 steps forward, hands up like some peace offering was still an option. You found it? He asked. The birdhouse. I found more than that, I said. He nodded slowly, lips tight. It wasn't supposed to go like this. You wired my dog's kennel, I said. You don't get to play sorry now. He looked at Bear, then back at me. They want the water, Frank, not the land. The hoe is just the cover. Granite Holdings is the buyer. Heron's their foot soldier. I'm just the data guy. I never touched the trap lines. I never meant to hurt you. Stop talking like you're not part of it, I said. You mapped my habits. You recorded my breathing. You helped them send people in the night. He looked down. They were supposed to scare you off, just enough to make you leave voluntarily, so they could claim abandonment. I stepped off the porch, got close enough for him to feel the heat in my voice. You think I fought 2 wars to be scared off by signatures, undocumented? He didn't answer, just stepped back. You can still get out, he said. Just sign the land over. Take the buyout. They'll leave you alone. And if I don't, he hesitated. Then they escalate. Again, Bear growled, one low, sharp note. Derek flinched, didn't say goodbye, didn't try to explain, just walked back to his car and drove off like someone who knew time was running out. For him or me, I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't care. That night, I built the first trigger net. Not real explosives. Paint, flour, flashbangs, enough to disorient, enough to embarrass. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted visibility. The illusion of strength is often stronger than violence itself. Reese helped me run wiring through the north brush line, buried 2 flood strobes under the broken rake pile, and built makeshift watchtower using an old deer stand and miner's lantern. We called it the every light, every noise, every flash design, not to injure, but to remind them, we see you 2 nights later at work. Motion near the eastern fence. 3 figures dark clothes, no voices. They were fast, but not fast enough. The first strobe hit them like lightning. One dropped to the dirt, clutching his face. The second triggered the flower grenade. It burst in, a cloud of white and fiberglass. The third ran straight into the tripwire net. No injuries. But they didn't come back. Not that night. Karen did. The next morning, she showed up with 2 sheriff deputies and cease and desist. Letter folded like it meant something. She didn't speak first, just handed it over like she was the righteous one. You've created hostile environment, she said, and you're interfering with HOA duties. I didn't read the letter, just looked past her at the deputies. They looked tired, like they'd been pulled into something they didn't sign up for. Do your body cams work? I asked. One of them nodded. Good. Is she standing on private land without permission, issuing orders without jurisdiction, and threatening veteran on record? Karen's face tightened. Frank, don't make this worse than it already is. Worse, I said. Karen, you've already sent armed men to my gate, burned part of my property, and tried to wiretap my dog's sleeping spot. What exactly does worse mean to you? She didn't reply, just turned flustered. The deputies followed, slow, unsure. I didn't shout, didn't threaten. I just stood there holding the paper like it was already ash. That night I burned it, not for defiance, for cleansing, because sometimes the best way to file complaint is with fire. Later I sat on the porch, Bear's head on my boot, Reese beside me with a warm beer and a quiet question. You think this ends soon? I didn't answer right away. I just stared out over the fields. No, I said finally, but I think they're starting to bleed from their own paper cuts. And that gave me hope, because when an enemy bill to forms and permits starts to panic, they make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, men like us stop being targets and start being consequences. And I was ready to become the consequence they'd been trying to avoid. The problem with people who only understand control is they never expect resistance to be patient. They expect fire. They don't expect cold strategy. And I'd grown cold, not bitter, just deliberate. When someone tries to quietly take what you've bled to build, it changes something in you. You don't panic, you plot. That week, I didn't speak to anyone but Bear, no Reese, no neighbors. Just the land, the silence, and my preparations. The HOA. Sending Karen with her folder full of threats and 2 deputies who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else wasn't just warning. It was a litmus test. They were measuring me, gauging how close I was to snapping or surrendering. But they didn't know the answer. I wasn't close to either. I was simply becoming still, the kind of still you get before you move faster than you ever have. I started digging again, not for trenches or traps, for records, old ones, property deeds, water rights, archived meeting notes from HOA sessions most people never attended. Found something interesting buried in the minutes of board meeting from 4 years ago. A notation about potential infrastructural value of lots adjacent to mine, a vague phrase probably meant to pass without notice. But I noticed because the only thing adjacent to me was forest and dirt, unless you were counting the aquifer, which they were. They'd been counting it for years, watching it, mapping it. Derek didn't just betray me. He'd been part of something larger. He was the scout. Karen was the voice. But someone else, someone with real money, was pulling the strings. That's when I built the trap bore, not metaphorically. An actual 6-foot deep pit line with rubber matting hidden under the barn floor. Took me 2 days. I wired it with 2 flash strobes and a paint burst triggered by a pressure latch. Nothing lethal, just humbling. I didn't want to maim anyone. I wanted them to question every step they took on my land. Reese showed up on the 3rd day and took one look at it and laughed. You building bounce house for burglars? He asked. I didn't laugh. No, I said. I'm building reset button. That night we turned the property dark, no lights, no audio loops. Just stillness, the kind that makes intruders feel powerful until the ground swallows them at 1 a.m. It happened. Motion sensor ping from the east tree line. 3 figures. Not kids. These moved with intent. Quiet, precise. One cut the fence like he'd done it before. Another carried signal jammer. Long antenna sweeping the path like divining rod for weakness. The third was the real threat. He had posture, contractor posture, shoulders relaxed but ready. I watched from the loft of the barn, breath held, thumb over the trigger. First guy stepped inside, click, calm, straight through the panel into the pit. Second guy panicked, tried to backpedal, lost his footing, tumbled in. Then came the strobes, flash and paint, enough to disorient, enough to leave him soaked and stunned. I stepped out of the shadows, spotlight in one hand, sidearm in the other. Good evening, I said. One of them tried to stand, slip again, covered in yellow dye and powdered sugar. I didn't say more, didn't need to. That was when Reese arrived, crowbar in one hand, cooler in the other. He peered into the hole. You get them, but 2, I said. Third one might be smarter or deader, he muttered, then cracked open beer. We didn't call the sheriff. We called animal control, reported 2 feral intruders trapped in pit. Didn't lie, just let the system interpret it how it liked. The man who showed up took one look and just shook his head. Damn, he said. Y'all really play defense out here? We don't play, I said. He nodded, took the men off our hands without more than a form. Never asked how they got in. Didn't want to know. He'd seen worse. And probably knew better than to poke. A nest full of hornets with legal degrees. The next day, Karen showed up again. No deputies this time, just her in a navy blue blazer that tried to look expensive and the clipboard that looked heavier than usual. She stood just outside my property line, hands trembling just enough for me to notice. You think this makes you untouchable? She snapped. I didn't respond, just kept sharpening the same axe she'd seen last time. You've weaponized your home, she continued. You've created hostile environment. No, I said. I created response. She stepped closer, voice lowered. They're going to escalate. Then they'll meet something new. I said, something that's not interested in de-escalation. She tried to smirk, failed. Do you think this land makes you king? No, I said, but it makes me the homeowner, which still means something in this country. For now, she flinched like the words burned. She knew she was losing grip, not just on me, but on the narrative, on the story she'd been telling others, that I was the problem, that I was unstable. But now the board had footage. Neighbors had seen the fire, the men, the van. She couldn't gaslight the whole county. That night, I crafted my final letter, dossier, not angry, not emotional, just facts. Photos, recordings, drone shots at trespassers, audio logs of HOA meetings where Karen mentioned, removing problem members, copy of the aquifer clause, notarized, and for the finishing touch, picture of the mic I'd pulled from Bear's kennel, Derek's prototype label still scratched into the board. I dropped it into the HOA Dropbox just before dawn. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't need one. I already knew. Within 36 hours, the emergency board meeting was called, not public, but neighbors talked, one by one. The same folks who once crossed the street to avoid eye contact now drop off little offerings, a jar of pickles, a six-pack, a half smile, and it stays safe. That's how you know the tide's turned in place like this, not with parades, but with cautious, quiet respect. Karen disappeared for a day, then returned just once. Same blazer, same fire. Her eyes. You made mess. She hissed. No, I said. You made bet and you lost. She didn't respond. Just stared at Bear for a second longer than necessary, then left. A week later, the board announced a suspension. Misuse of authority. Conflict of interest. Unreported contractor ties. Her name was pulled from the newsletter with all the ceremony of a typo. No apology. Just deletion. And me? I didn't throw a party. I didn't gloat. I poured Bear a bowl of rye bite raw and room temp. He earned it. We sat together on the porch, watching the wind move through the grass like river of memory. The traps were still armed. The lights still blinked. But that night, for the first time in months, I breathed deep, because the land was still mine, and I was still standing, and if they ever came again, well, this time I wouldn't just answer. I'd end it. It should have ended there. Karen gone, Derek vanished, the board neutered by their own documents, and silence had won. Not with bullets or blood, but with persistence, proof, and the kind of strategic patience that only comes after 60 winters and more betrayals. Friendships, the land was quiet again, the real kind of quiet. Not the kind before a strike, but the kind that lets you sleep with both boots off and the fire low. Bear started wagging his tail again when I whistled. Reese even stopped carrying a crowbar around like it was a second spine. I'd begun patching the east fence, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could go back to being man who tended things instead of defending them. But that was hope talking, not wisdom. A letter arrived on Tuesday. No return address. The envelope was plain, typewritten, clean. Inside was single sentence and photograph. She was just the beginning. The photo was grainy, night vision green, angled from high up. Maybe drone. Maybe hidden perch. It showed my shed. And crouched beside it, figure in black hoodie, gloved, holding what looked like camera rig. Nothing else in the frame except Bear asleep near the steps. The dog hadn't even flinched, which meant whoever took this had walked right past him. That unsettled me more than the message. Not because I felt violated. I was used to that. But because it meant we were past the HOA now. This was something else. Something Culver. Karen had been the scalpel. This was the hand that held it. I didn't panic, didn't even move at first. I just stared at that photo like it was a puzzle I'd already solved once, but had to reassemble from memory. I knew the ground. I knew the shadows. What I didn't know was who could move past Bear without triggering response that required training, familiarity, or chemicals, none of which belonged to property managers. I called Reese, told him to bring the box. He didn't ask which one. An hour later, we were sitting at my kitchen table, unsealing the crate we'd labeled. Red-lined, dusty military case full of things we swore we'd never need again. Inside were blueprints, encrypted drives, homemade sensors, and the one thing I hadn't used in 15 years. The kill switch, small device, handmade, fitted with 3 buttons, each coded to different layer of defensive measure, one for noise, one for non-lethal scatter, and the last Well, we'd talk about the last. It was the reset button, the kind that rewrites the rules of engagement. We swept the property that night, not for traps, but for blind spots. I thought I'd mapped every inch. But this time I looked through different lens, not defense, not even offense. I looked for vulnerability, points where man could crawl, perch, listen. The southwest ravine was tighter than I remembered. The tree line near the abandoned chicken coop had thin. I counted 5 spots where someone could linger for over an hour without being seen. We sealed them all. Trail cams went up. Real ones, not decoys. Infrared, motion-activated, short-range broadcast. Wired directly to a secure terminal inside the barn. Reese even rigged one with a thermal overlay he borrowed from an old fire crew buddy. We weren't just watching now, we were collecting, because it was time to stop reacting. It was time to start hunting. 2 nights later, movement pinged at 3:27 a.m. Southeast quadrant. Slow, controlled, 4 heat signatures. No engine noise, no lights. Whoever they were, they moved like they'd rehearsed. Bear was on his feet before the second sensor lit, his tail stiff, head low, not growling, just alert. He moved fast. Boots on, vest zipped, rifle loaded. Reese met me at the shed. We didn't speak, just nodded. I handed him the signal jammer we'd built last year from an old ham radio kit. It worked better than it should have. We waited. The first breach came from the east trail. They bypassed the fence completely. Cut through the old irrigation trench. One went down quick. Trip scatterburst. I'd wired a false valve. White smoke, yellow dye, loud as sin. The second doubled back, stumbled right into the perimeter wire by the woodpile. Not lethal, but shocking enough to knock the wind out of lesser man. The third and fourth circled toward the barn. I followed in silence. Just as they reached the rear door, Reese triggered the flare. It burst like war drum. Lit them up in silhouette. One froze. The other drew weapon. I didn't wait. Dropped him with leg shot, clean, precise. He screamed once, then went quiet. We bagged them both, alive. Dazed, breathing hard. No tattoos, no insignia, no IDs. Just the same black gear, same comms pieces, and patch I hadn't seen before. A silver thread emblem, a surveyor's compass over darkened globe. That wasn't military. That wasn't corporate. That was private intelligence. We zip-tied them, blindfolded, placed them under the barn lights, and let them sweat. Reese lit cigarette and watched the door. I sat across from the cleaner one. No wounds, no expression. Who sent you? I asked. He smiled, not smug smile, the kind man gives when he believes something you already know, he said. She was just one piece. You were on the list long before her. What list? I said. The one that ends you, he said. That earned him fist to the gut. I didn't enjoy it, but I needed him to lose that smile. He did. Eventually, they didn't give us names. Didn't even ask to call lawyers. Just waited. That's what chilled me. They weren't afraid. They were on assignment, and they'd failed. But they didn't treat it like failure. They treated it like calibration. We handed one over to the local sheriff. Said he broke in. Pulled weapon. Got dropped. They didn't ask many questions. The other 3 we let walk. Sunrise. Sent them home painted, bruised, and rattled. Message delivered. The following afternoon, a black SUV old past the end of my road. Slowed. Didn't stop. Windows tinted. The kind of pass that says we're still here. I didn't wave. Just stood in the yard, axe in hand. Sleeves rolled, shirt stained with old dirt, new intent. That night, I moved the kill switch to my best pocket. Not paranoia, preparedness. Because they weren't trying to buy me out anymore. They were testing the threshold, seeing how far they could push before something broke. But I don't break. Not anymore. I harden, I root, and I wait, because the next time they come, they won't be looking for leverage. They'll be looking for closure, and I'll give it to them in full, because I didn't build this home to retreat. I built it to endure. And if they want to see what that really looks like, then they'd best bring more than silence and drones. They'd best bring damn army.